The world knew her as the Queen of Disco, the woman whose voice could make 70,000 people lose themselves on a dance floor. But on a cold afternoon in Munich, Germany, in late 1975, Donna Summer stood frozen in a recording studio, staring at a microphone like it was a loaded gun. Her hands were shaking. Giorgio Moroder, the man who would become the architect of her fame, sat behind the glass with his arms crossed, waiting. And what he was about to ask her to do would change everything. Not just her career, but the way she saw herself for the rest of her life. Donna had come to Munich as LaDonna Gaines, a gospel-trained singer from Boston who'd spent years performing in European theater productions of Hair and Godspell. She was 27 years old, married to an Austrian actor, raising a young daughter, and barely scraping by. She wasn't looking to become a sex symbol. She wasn't looking to scandalize the world. She was just looking for work, for a chance to sing, for a way to keep the lights on. But Giorgio Moroder had other plans. He'd been experimenting with synthesizers, drum machines, and a new sound that was starting to bubble up from underground clubs, a sound that would soon be called disco. And he needed a voice. Not just any voice. He needed someone who could embody desire itself. Before we continue, if you're enjoying this story, please consider subscribing. We bring you untold stories from music history that you won't find anywhere else. What Donna didn't know, as she stood in that studio, was that the next 17 minutes of her life would define the next 40 years. Moroder had written a song called "Love to Love You Baby," and it wasn't like anything on the radio. It was slow, hypnotic, built around a pulsing synthesizer bass line that sounded like a heartbeat. But the song itself was secondary. What Moroder wanted was something else entirely. He wanted Donna to simulate the sounds of a woman in the throes of ecstasy, 22 times, for 17 minutes, with him and his recording engineer listening on the other side of the glass. Donna looked at the lyric sheet. She looked at Moroder. And then she said the words that would echo in her mind for decades. "I can't do this. I'm a Christian." The room went silent. The tape machine kept spinning, but no one moved. Moroder leaned back in his chair, studying her through the glass. He didn't argue. He didn't push. He just smiled, a small, knowing smile, and said something that would lodge itself in Donna's conscience like a splinter she could never quite remove. "Donna," he said, his accent thick, his tone almost fatherly. "Pretend you're making love to the man you love. Pretend I'm not even here." And then he did something that made it both easier and infinitely worse. He turned off the lights. Donna stood alone in the darkness, the microphone glowing faintly in front of her, the synthesizer loop beginning its slow, insistent throb. She closed her eyes, and she made a choice. She would do it. But she would do it in the dark, where no one could see her face, where she could pretend she was someone else, where LaDonna Gaines could disappear and Donna Summer could be born. What happened next would become one of the most controversial recordings in music history. Donna's voice, breathy and raw, began to weave through the instrumental track, building from soft moans to gasping crescendos. Moroder sat in the control room, transfixed. He'd been right. She wasn't just singing. She was embodying something primal, something that most pop music in 1975 wouldn't dare approach. When the session ended, 17 minutes later, Donna walked out of the studio without saying a word. She went home, locked herself in the bathroom, and cried. But the recording was done. And Giorgio Moroder knew exactly what he had. The song was released as a single in Europe in late 1975, and the reaction was immediate and polarizing. Some radio stations refused to play it. The BBC banned it outright, calling it indecent. But in the clubs, the underground discos in Paris, Berlin, Amsterdam, and New York, "Love to Love You Baby" became something close to a religious experience. DJs played the full 17-minute version, and dance floors erupted. People didn't just listen to the song, they lived inside it, and demand exploded. Neil Bogart, the head of Casablanca Records in the United States, heard the track and saw dollar signs. He called Moroder and demanded the full version. He wanted to release it as a single in America, uncut, all 17 minutes on one side of a vinyl record. It was unprecedented. Pop singles were 3 minutes long. But Bogart understood what was happening. This wasn't just a song, it was an event. When "Love to Love You Baby" hit American radio in early 1976, it didn't just climb the charts, it detonated. It reached number 2 on the Billboard Hot 100, kept from the top spot only by Donna's own label mate, Parliament. The song sold over 1 million copies. Donna Summer became a household name. And suddenly, the woman who'd been struggling to pay rent in Munich was performing on Soul Train, appearing on magazine covers and being invited to Studio 54, where Andy Warhol and Bianca Jagger wanted to meet the voice behind the moans. But Donna couldn't enjoy it. Every time she heard the song on the radio, she felt a wave of shame. Every time someone introduced her as the woman who'd made that record, she wanted to disappear. She would smile for the cameras, perform the song on stage with her eyes closed, and then retreat to her dressing room, where she would kneel and pray. She prayed for forgiveness. She prayed that God would understand she'd only been trying to survive. And she prayed that her mother back in Boston wouldn't hear it. But her mother did hear it. Everyone heard it. And the woman who'd raised Donna in a strict Pentecostal household, who'd taught her to sing hymns in church, who'd instilled in her a deep fear of sin, that woman called her daughter on the phone and asked, in a voice Donna would never forget, "LaDonna, what have you done?" Donna didn't have an answer, not one that felt true. She tried to explain that it was just acting, just performance, just a job. But even as she said the words, she didn't believe them. Because deep down, Donna knew the truth. She hadn't just performed desire. She'd felt it, and that's what made it so powerful. That's what made people unable to look away. And that's what made her feel, for years afterward, like she'd sold something she could never get back. Giorgio Moroder, meanwhile, was already planning the next move. He saw Donna's discomfort, her reluctance, but he also saw her potential. And he knew that if they were going to keep this momentum, they needed to double down. The follow-up album, A Love Trilogy, leaned even further into the sultry, sensual sound that had made Donna famous. Songs like Could It Be Magic and Try Me, I Know We Can Make It kept the temperature high, and the world kept buying. But behind the scenes, Donna was fracturing. She'd started therapy. She was having panic attacks before performances. She would stand backstage, listening to the crowd chant her name, and feel nothing but dread. The persona she'd created, the confident, seductive Donna Summer, felt like a costume she couldn't take off. And the more successful she became, the more trapped she felt inside it. In 1977, Donna released I Feel Love, another collaboration with Moroder, and it changed music forever. The song was pure synthesizer, no guitars, no traditional instruments, just electronic pulses and Donna's voice soaring above it all. Brian Eno famously said it was the sound of the future. David Bowie called it revolutionary. And it was. But for Donna, it was just another brick in the wall between LaDonna Gaines and the woman the world thought she was. She was now the Queen of Disco, a title that felt both like a crown and a cage. She was selling out arenas, appearing on television specials, and rubbing shoulders with the biggest names in entertainment. But at home, she was reading the Bible to her daughters, attending church in secret, and struggling to reconcile the two lives she was living. She felt like a fraud in both worlds, too worldly for the church, too righteous for the stage. And then, in 1979, something inside her snapped. She was in a hotel room in Germany, full circle back where it had all started, and she found herself standing at the window, looking down at the street below, thinking about how easy it would be to just step off the ledge. She didn't want to die, not exactly. She just wanted the noise to stop, the guilt, the shame, the constant feeling that she was living someone else's life. She stood there for a long time, and then the phone rang. It was her manager calling to confirm the next day's schedule. Donna picked up the phone, said she'd be ready, and hung up, and she stepped away from the window. But the darkness didn't go away. It just became part of the baseline hum of her existence. By the early 1980s, Donna was trying to reinvent herself. She released The Wanderer, a rock-influenced album that signaled a departure from disco. She was tired of being the sex goddess. She wanted to be taken seriously as an artist, as a musician, as something more than the woman who moaned on a record. And to some extent, it worked. She won her first rock Grammy in 1984 for Hot Stuff, becoming the first black woman to win in that category. It was a triumph, but it was also bittersweet. Because by then, the scandal that would define the rest of her career was already beginning to brew. In 1983, during a concert, a rumor began to circulate. Someone claimed that Donna had said, during a backstage conversation, that AIDS was God's punishment for homosexuality. The exact words, "God made Adam and Eve, not Adam and Steve," were attributed to her, though no recording exists, no transcript, no definitive proof. But in the middle of the AIDS crisis, when fear and anger were running high, the rumor was enough. Gay fans, who had been Donna's most loyal supporters from the beginning, felt betrayed. Activists organized boycotts. Elton John and the Village People publicly condemned her. Record stores were picketed. Albums were burned. Donna denied the comments repeatedly. She issued statements, gave interviews, and insisted she'd been misquoted or misunderstood. But the damage was done. The LGBTQ community, which had lifted her to stardom, now saw her as a traitor. And for Donna, the irony was crushing. She'd spent years feeling ashamed of the sexual persona that had made her famous. And now, the people who'd celebrated that persona felt she'd turned her back on them. The truth, as it often is, was more complicated. Donna was a devout Christian. She did believe in traditional interpretations of Scripture, but she also loved her gay fans, had gay friends, and never intended to cause harm. The collision of her faith and her fame created a no-win situation, and the fallout nearly destroyed her. By the mid-1980s, Donna's career had stalled. The boycotts worked. Radio stations stopped playing her music. Concert attendance dropped. She retreated from the public eye, spending more time with her family, painting in her home studio, and trying to make peace with the life she'd lived. She never stopped performing entirely, but the superstar days were over, and in some ways she seemed relieved, but the guilt never left. In interviews later in life, Donna would talk about "love to love you, baby," with a kind of weary resignation. She'd acknowledge its importance, its impact, but she'd also admit that she wished she'd never made it. She wished Giorgio Moroder had asked someone else. She wished she'd said no and stayed in the dark, not just in the studio, but in obscurity. And that's the tragedy of Donna Summer. She gave the world something revolutionary: sound, a feeling, a moment. But she paid for it with her sense of self. Giorgio Moroder had asked her to pretend she was making love to the man she loved, and she did. But in the process, she lost sight of the woman she was. LaDonna Gaines disappeared into Donna Summer, and she spent the rest of her life trying to find her way back. In 2001, Donna was in New York on September 11th. She was staying at a hotel in Manhattan when the towers fell. Like everyone else, she watched in horror. But unlike most people, she didn't leave. She stayed in the city for days, breathing in the air thick with smoke and dust and ash. Years later, when she was diagnosed with lung cancer, she believed, privately, quietly, that it had started that day. The toxic air, the particulates, the poison that hung over the city for weeks. She'd never smoked a cigarette in her life, but her lungs were destroyed. And on May 17, 2012, at the age of 63, Donna Summer died. Her funeral was attended by hundreds. Luminaries from the music world paid tribute. Quincy Jones, Gloria Estefan, Liza Minnelli, they all spoke about her talent, her kindness, her legacy. But in the crowd, quietly, some members of the LGBTQ community also came, not to protest, not to condemn, but to mourn. Because time had softened the anger, and in the years since her death, the conversation around Donna Summer has shifted. People talk less about the scandal and more about the music, less about the rumors and more about the revolution she sparked. But the question remains: what would Donna's life have looked like if she'd said no that day in Munich? If she'd walked out of the studio and never made that record? Would she have found success another way? Would she have been happier? Would LaDonna Gaines have lived a quieter, simpler life, singing in small clubs, raising her children, painting in peace? We'll never know. Because Donna made the choice. She stepped into the darkness, opened her mouth, and let something out that she could never take back. And Giorgio Moroder's words, "Pretend I'm not even here," became the cruelest irony of all. Because after that, he was always there. In every performance, every interview, every moment of shame. The voice on the other side of the glass, asking her to give more, to be more, to become something she wasn't sure she wanted to be. Donna Summer gave the world disco, but disco took Donna Summer. And in the end, the woman who sang about love so convincingly spent much of her life wondering if she'd ever really known what it felt like to be loved for who she truly was. That's the real story. Not the moans, not the scandal, but the quiet, aching truth of a woman who became famous for sounding like she was feeling everything, and spent the rest of her life trying to feel anything at all.